There was a report of an explosion with some casualties and a deceased victim.
We had no idea if this was a targeted attack or if it was a terrorist attack. We can figure out what this is.
Is the victim the actual intended target? That is really crucial information. We go through the layers because that might tell you who your offender is.
A very visual public used to kill this woman. And I think that tells us an awful lot about the person who did that.
Are they going to strike again? Detectives will do everything in their powers to catch that killer at the crime scene.
In California, the FBI raced to the scene of a huge explosion.
Back!
The damage to this building, walls had come off the side of the building, a lot of glass and debris had been blown outside of the building and onto the street. The stairs hanging down from the ceiling, and so the damage itself was quite catastrophic.
Jesus.
But it's actually really daunting and really quite scary, I would say, to attend an incident like this. Because where do you start?
283.
3 women are seriously injured. 1 is presumed dead.
We needed to mobilize the entire squad.
If it is a deliberate attack, is there a secondary device? Is it a terrorist attack? Are they looking at maybe other attacks in viewpoint? So all these things will be going through your mind.
As emergency services search for further casualties, 2 and specialist officers urgently evacuate the area.
Anytime there's a mass detonation, there's always a risk. Only concerned that there were more attacks coming.
Get back from the building, please!
Your concern goes to anyone who...
Okay, that's it. You guys back up.
We had tons of individuals from surrounding businesses. We had a children needed to walk by that area in order to evacuate.
The first priority was to, first of all, make sure priority number 2 was to find out what happened.
The epicenter of the blast is a beauty spa.
Check out. She said she turned around to open up off and saw her. Okay, this might be a bomb.
Blast has claimed the life of Ildiko Kranjak, the owner of the beauty spa.
She ran the business. She operated the business. That was true for years and years and years.
Ildiko first trained as a beautician in Hungary over 30 years ago.
Everyone descriptions for her as a person. She was very loving and kind. She was very lively. She was a good friend. She would check in on her friends on a regular basis, her family and her friends. And for our surviving witnesses, they will never be the same.
Agent Ashley Miracle heads to the hospital to speak to the 2 injured women.
Given the trauma of what had occurred, the details remembered were remarkable. They were receiving facials that day from Ildiko, who had just got back. She had walked over behind her desk. One was standing approximately 4 feet away from Ildiko, up top of her desk on the corner. The box was about waist level. The victim told us that as the explosion occurred, she saw a bright white light that was brighter than anything she's able to describe, the sounds, the smells.
It's always difficult speaking with witnesses who will be traumatized for a white smoke leave the building area after the device exploded. Those are all very important factors in determining the type of device. We knew that it was a package bombing. That changed our entire mindset. That told me that this was a deliberate act, a motivation to try and solve this type of crime, to get Ildiko justice.
Once evacuated the crime scene,
Something in that box has caused the explosion. We now have important evidence that we need to find within that scene. You got to the area and go through the layers. Because obviously sometimes in an explosion, there's lots of things that fall on top of where the explosion's happened. So actually they divide under a pile of rubble. So sometimes it's not immediately obvious where something's happened. But at the same time, there's so much that's going on in the background. Detectives, whilst the CSIs are examining the scene.
We knew Ildiko was out of town in Europe a week, so we did not know if the package was addressed to our victim or if it was placed there. We need to determine. And so the victimology, to learning everything we can, their habits, their work, professional, personal history, financial history.
That is really crucial information. It's almost like a starburst of information. They're looking for her mobile phone, where's her...
And people who had access to her schedule. We have to keep an open mind and let the evidence drive us.
Is Ildiko meeting with somebody who are the customers at the shop? Who's her partner or who's her ex-partner? Is there anyone that's got a grudge against her?
In Aliso Viejo, California, Ildiko Kraniak has been killed by a parcel bomb, which has obliterated her beauty spa, Magia Cosmetica.
The scene of an explosion, that you don't just concentrate on that area itself, because an explosion scene creates a huge amount of energy, debris and damage quite a long way from the actual site of the explosion. So we would look at the furthest building that's damaged or the furthest bit of debris that you can find where it's been flung out from the scene, and then go further than that, so go another 25 or 30 or 40 metres in that scene. But it's scattered over such a larger area, it's a big job.
As CSIs search through the wreckage, whether anyone would have intended to target Ildiko.
Anytime that you have a homicide of this nature, this was devastating to her family and her friends. She was described as a wonderful human being who was cherished by her family.
It's always difficult to cope with the loss of life, especially in such a brutal way that this crime was.
And our surviving victims, getting them closure, obtaining justice for them, for that we worked very hard for. All these different scenarios go through your mind as an investigator where you have to put what this is.
Investigators appeal for help catching the bomber.
There was a press release asking for anybody with information to contact the authorities. A man called into the Orange County Sheriff's tip.
ABC News story. There was like an explosion or something. And I said, no, that's our building. And that's our...
That he had some ownership into the business.
I'm going like, well, what the hell is going on?
And I'm sorry, you said it's your suite? So you were at that...
Kraniak and I are both on the lease.
The man is 59-year-old aspiring actor Stephen Beale.
We didn't know he targeted as well, or maybe he was the target. We sent investigators to his residence to keep eyes on it, to make sure.
On arrival at his home, 30 miles from the crime scene, investigators have immediate concerns.
One of the things that arrived at his house notice was that he also had received some packages at his house. There were not only packages outside, but Mr. And so immediately they called back and notified the command post.
The team decided and asked him to come outside to speak with them and not to touch any of the packages.
Steven,
Can they go inside?
the packages are on the left side of the front door.
So as I walk
right inside the door. Right as you open the door, the packages are to the left.
And so our boss, pursuant to consent, to check those boxes.
He revealed that he was expecting these packages.
Expecting them, yeah.
Okay.
FBI bomb technicians declare them as safe.
They also asked if they could search the house for...
You think it's going to hurt me, hurt my partner inside there?
No.
Detectives ask Stephen about his relationship with Ildiko.
Close. And not only that, but I know more about her than probably 95% of the people that you can talk to.
Stephen Beale said that Ildiko...
Stephen Beale, a widow, and Ildiko, who was separated from her husband, first met online in 2016, became embedded in each other's lives. Soon, the couple are spending almost all their time together. couple went on luxurious holidays, visiting Portugal, Mexico, and Canada. Within a year, they co-signed Magia Cosmetica.
That business was primarily Ildiko's. That was a business that she operated prior to meeting.
Stephen tells officers he can think of no reason why anyone would target Ildiko or the beauty spa.
Your whole deal is means, motive, and it has the motive.
But investigators have concerns of Stephen's account.
We learned that they were never married. So we couldn't understand why would you inflate that or lie about that.
Statistically, women more likely to get killed by a partner, so the police will be looking at that relationship.
As detectives delve deeper, specialists...
We said we cannot get tunnel vision. I was still worried that there was somebody out there addressed to our victim, or if it was placed there, if it was mailed there. What we did immediately was contact your Amazons, the United States Postal Service, UPS, anyone who delivered.
We had other teams canvassing neighborhoods, doing searches for CCTV. Building where Ildiko's spa was located. However, unfortunately, those cameras were not functional. They were not working. That was affixed to the front of the nursery school located across the street. It didn't capture the street in front of the building where the explosion occurred.
As digital forensics analyze the footage, CSI's meticulous.
Scenes like this would be gridded off, and then every bit of evidence within one grid would be recovered. These are then put in a contact evidence that needs to be meticulously searched through to see if there's any things that might be a part of a device. So you might be looking for bits of wire, you might hands of a watch or batteries.
The team needs to determine which chemicals were used to create the explosion.
Chemicals might have been used, might be able to match those to a second scene, and therefore you might have evidence that can link your suspect to your... CSIs would take soil samples from areas where some of the chemicals or some of the debris might have landed.
We took samples, explosion went out and up. We collected it and sent it back to the FBI lab for analysis.
As detectives wait up to 36 at Stephen Beale's home, they're confronted with an alarming discovery.
Containers of chemicals. They were containers of oxidizers and fuels that are...
One of our most senior bomb technicians said it's the most explosive chemicals he's seen in a residence in his entire career. At that point, we obtained a search warrant. We wanted to find out more information. I wanted to get those chemicals as soon as possible.
Obviously, as an investigator, anytime you have an explosive event and you go to the residence of someone and there's chemicals present that can be used to make an explosion, obviously this piques your interest.
With questions to answer, Sheriff's Office.
The day after the bombing, Mr. Beale said he wanted to speak with the investigators about basically what happened.
Real quick, voluntarily, you're free to end the interview at any time. Okay, you're not under arrest.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you for that.
All right.
Mr. Beale told them the reason why he...
You know where that all comes from? Rocketry. Because I used to build rockets. I don't know what's in my garage. I don't know what chemicals they found. It's, relevant to that hobby.
Would someone with your type of experience be able to cut a bigger scale?
I saw the devastation, in the pictures and news reports. I have no idea how you think like that. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how you would go about doing that. That looks like a C4 sort of explosion or a lot of damage.
Yeah.
And unless the package that she was opening was very large, I can't imagine anything creating that sort of impact.
Why would you assume it was a package that she opened?
Because it's in the news reports.
Did she open the package?
Detectives believe Ildiko was opening the mail that arrived while she'd been away overseas.
How do you know she was back in the U.S. schedule? I'm the business manager for her. Did you get to share a calendar or something? Yeah.
I wanted to... Was there any bad blood between him and Ildiko?
Detectives request Beale's cell site data and phone records, search his home and car.
When you're searching a vehicle, you need to think about, is there anything in that vehicle that would link it to your crime? The vehicle be fingerprinted in particular areas, swab for DNA. There would also be a search for any component parts of the device, or any chemical swab for any remnants of the chemicals, and any swabs that are taken are sent off to a forensic scientist for analysis.
As searchers and detectives focus on the couple's relationship, looking for any reason he would want to harm her.
What we were able to see was that it appeared as though their relationship started to sour around February of prior to the bombing. There of a potential breakup.
Beale realized that Ildiko was pulling away from him. There's constant texting and calling. He's just throwing all of this attention at her, just like he did in the beginning of the relationship.
We also located audio recordings where Mr. Beale would profess his love for Ildiko.
Dear Ildiko, I love you for the way you make me feel when I'm with you. I love your eyes. I love your smile. And I love your voice for you to make you happy. I love how I know you'll always be there when I need you to be. I love the way I can't imagine a day.
Throws all of these romantic messages at her. It's very intense and it's going to be very obsessive.
If happiness, take the best of them and bind them in your hair.
We can see the love bombing, which is a pattern of behavior designed. He's got all his identity invested in this relationship, which is why it's so very difficult when that relationship is a sign of that real obsession. And that makes this person incredibly dangerous.
FBI are talking with Stephen Beale's friend, Ildiko Kraniak. While CSI search the crime scene and Beale's home, they've uncovered a weapons.
Dream of my life partner, the only person that I can see is you.
Ildiko's friends said that she was feeling trapped but as she began to feel more trapped and suffocated by him and the relationship, she realized that leaving, he could see Ildiko pulling away from him. He was losing control and he responded really badly. He's turning up when she doesn't really want him to stalk her. And the stalkers are obsessive people.
As the case against Beale grows, detectives still need a forensic link to connect him to the crime scene. At the bomb site, hidden within the layers of debris, CSIs have a breakthrough.
Above the seat of the blast, embedded in the wood, with such force, the evidence response team found very small pieces of a yellow insulation. The wire was separated and jagged and melted like it was exposed to extreme heat. That wire back to the device, which was possibly used to help power it. We have experts at the FBI labs in metals, and they specialize in plastics. We were able to determine that this is not your everyday wiring type of copper and insulation that it had. It had a very unique signature. However, wiring can be extremely difficult to pinpoint it to this exact manufacturer.
Also embedded in the floorboards,
we later determined that there were battery cells of a 9-volt battery, which initial training and experience is that battery was extreme ice when it went off. And the wrapping, called the jacket of the battery, was actually filleted open, which is a pharmacy store here in the United States. So we immediately collected all those and sent them back to the FBI lab.
I'm just going to swab the outside surface in the hope that you might get some DNA. For the purposes of this, we use nooks and crannies. So the battery casing, of course, because it's been an explosion, you might, especially on this, you get some soot where the explosions happened. So let's have a look at it under the magnifying glass. Markings on there that would identify make, model, any serial numbers on it.
I was in the hallway outside of our command post. I got a call from the explosive examiner. There's some unique numbers on each cell. Skaters immediately became battery experts, and we were able to contact the vendor. We contacted the shipper, and we were made. And they were made in a factory. We knew what belt they were made on when they were shipped to the United States. CVS battery was part of that initial pallet of approximately 13,000 batteries that arrived in Los Angeles just a few months before.
An intelligence team worked to narrow down which of the 1,200 CVS stores in California.
The police can access transactions made, what direct debits might have been made, recent purchases. Detectives are trying to find out who match it up to where it's been bought and purchased, because that might tell you who your offender is.
So, yeah, it changed everything. Say it was a significant part of the investigation is, in my mind, an understatement. It was the investigation, in my opinion.
The FBI to Beale's records and see whether he could have bought the 9-volt battery. On his devices, the digital forensic team.
One of the things that we located was a log of his dates with Ildiko and the amount of time that was spent on to be somewhat obsessive behavior. So for us, that was very telling in what he saw their relationship to be, and he was.
When a controlling person's in a relationship, they will want that relationship to be as formal and get it.
They also find a draft of a new will, changing the sole beneficiary from his children to Ildiko.
Making that relationship as close to a marriage, a formal marriage, as you can get. Putting every single... That means that Ildiko now has responsibilities towards him, and he has rights over them, which is why it ends. He's feeling a sense of injustice because how dare she leave me? So the way to resolve that is through maybe killing them.
With Stephen Beale the prime suspect for Ildiko's murder, detectives still need to find forensic evidence to link him. They keep him talking as they continue to interrogate his digital footprint.
For months and months and months and months, she had her phone set up so that, you know, if I wanted to log into her phone, I could. Yeah. And I never used that other than to, you know, go into her schedule. And then she just, for seemingly no reason, she what the new password was. And this was part of the confrontation about that.
She tried to almost break it gently, not in a formal relationship. No, we are not exclusive. You know, break those ties of control. Immediately, what was happening. And as soon as they start to feel that, they start to become more dangerous.
An urgent call comes in from the forensic lab.
The chemicals found at Beale's home address matched the same types of samples from the actual site of the explosion. Also, the same chemical traces were found in the vehicle. And that means that this vehicle can send you a device, or it could have been used to transport chemicals that have been used in the manufacturing of the device.
Rocketry. The chemical match is not enough evidence to charge him.
In any homicide that has, first of all, a motive to do something, do they actually have the capability and the opportunity to do it?
Speaking with Mr. Beale during the interviews was that he learned that Ildiko had begun dating other people.
How about this guy in Sacramento that you were? I'm pretty sure they met on a dating site. She'd been up there a couple of times at least. Yeah. So how'd you find that out? I confronted her with some changes in her behavior. For me, why are you trying to hide it? She'd come to me and said, you know, I really think that I want to, like, open up, so I want to, you know, date other men. I would have said, okay. You know, we ultimately had that discussion. Well, like, it was the hiding it that was a planned deceit.
Someone like Beale is going to be constantly looking at that conversation was the proof that he was losing his control. Like Beale starts to see the situation as irreversible or irretrievable. This person's never coming back. And that's when the problems really started. We tend to get then the threat of, I'll kill myself if you leave. We can't be apart. But we know that he had no intentions whatsoever of ever leaving Ildiko and ever letting her leave him. And according to the research, the most common phrase used by these partners, no one can.
As an investigator, when you're hearing all these little fragments of information about feeling hurt and betrayed, information about disagreements, all of those things are pieces of the puzzle that to establish a motive for a crime.
Then, Beale's interview is interrupted.
Bomb technicians that were still searching Mr. Beale's house when the interview was going on called back to the command post and advised that they're found in Mr. Beale's attic in a backpack. The bomb technicians tested the backpack. Chemicals energetic. And they reported back that the preliminary tests were.
Do you know what was in your attic?
What attic?
House?
Right above my bedroom, yeah.
Okay. Was there a backpack up there?
Oh, no.
So can I ask you a question? See, what attic? You know there's an attic in your home.
Well, yeah, I know there's an attic in my home, but there's also the space that's above the pool room.
You know what I'm getting at. Yeah.
And that you found stuff up in the attic.
Mm-hmm. Backpack that looked like it was recently placed up there, considering attics are fairly dusty places.
Time, the recommendation for public safety was to arrest Mr. Beale for having that device.
Beale is held in custody. But to charge him with murder, they still need forensic evidence to link him.
It's pertinent that police forces and police officers act quite quickly. All of a sudden, this investigation of an explosion has grown massive, specifically working on the digital side of the investigation. Digital investigations form part of mobile phone downloads, text messages, photographs.
It is a huge undertaking. We had an entire team looking at his financial records as well.
One transaction stands out.
Just a few days before the bombing, we located that Mr. Beale went to an ATM in Long Beach, California, not too far from his home. We got CCTV and the financial records of him. We had a detective from the Los Angeles Police Department who knew that area, and he knew that there was a CVS right across the street. Would not have been purchased before of March 2018. The detectives went to CVS, made contact with the store manager. I remember when I read something significant in the world happens. You remember where you were at. This was one of them for me.
FBI investigating the murder of Ildiko Krajniak. Forensic breakthrough.
Looking for a purchase of a CVS 9-volt battery that we believed was used to power the device. That was the focus of our investigation at that point.
Worked out which of the 1,200 CVS stores in California the battery was bought from.
The detectives went to see the store manager. And they were able to locate Mr. Beale purchasing one single 9-volt battery from that CVS. That definitely changed everything. There was enough evidence to prove beyond reasonable doubt to charge him.
And with such a massive scene of destruction, one tiny little battery is all we need to prove what's happened. We now have to prove to a court, beyond all reasonable doubt, that that offender did that crime.
After weeks of cross-referencing Beale's data, the digital team have plotted his movements. 3 days after Ildiko left, Beale buys 3 boxes, which match the size of the one housing the bomb. Cell site data then indicates he went to Ildiko's spa.
While reviewing that CCTV from a camera after the explosion occurred, there was a vehicle that matched Stephen Beale's.
The CVS battery. Beale's cell site data and CCTV show him going back to the spa.
Of evidence. We had little tiny pieces of a puzzle that we were able to put together to create a story that told us delivering this package bomb to Ildiko's spa.
Once Beale realized that Ildiko did not want to be out and bought all of the items that he needed to build an explosive device, We see him deciding almost all of this was to kill Ildiko. And then we see the meticulous planning of how he was going to achieve that.
After the bombing, Stephen Beale faces trial.
I do believe that no stone was unturned.
It's hard to comprehend. So we wanted to show, using the exact same box, the exact same chemicals that were found and used in the bombing, what wanted to recreate a similar type of explosion. How destructive this actually really was. It's hard to speculate what you can hear a pin drop in the courtroom.
A very visual, public, theatrical way was used to, and I think that tells us an awful lot about the man who did that. He wants recognition, he wants to be seen, not given enough status by society, all of those kinds of things.
After the jury finds Stephen Beale guilty of the murder of Ildiko Kraniak, he's sentenced to life in prison with...
I don't think I'll ever forget it. There's so many unique things about this case. 2 victims who survived, the impact that this had on so many others. There are people that either witnessed this or knew, scared every time Amazon drops off a package at their house. I think the long-term effects and the damage is more significant than...
Ildiko is described as a really bubbly, friendly, out woman. The life and soul of the party, really. She was clever, she was skilled. She was working social skills. You make relationships with people, and we might think that that's not the type of person who could be killed by a partner, but anyone, absolutely anyone, can become a victim.
The catastrophe and the devastation that occurred to Ildiko and our surviving victims, it's devastating. I've lived experience I've ever had with a bombing in this area. It will never be the same.
I got a call in the middle of the night. Here was the dispatcher. They had a home invasion and possible homeless. Find a door that was open.
Is it a targeted attack?
There's a seedy side to the Silicon Valley.
In my opinion, bad habits.
We're talking about drugs. We're talking about sex.
The faces in the room were completely stunned. It was kind of a drop.
How did they come into contact if he wasn't there?
Our role as CSIs is to find the evidence, to catch the killer in fear. Is this going to happen to them? Are they at risk? The science will tell the story. Science doesn't lie.
In California, violent robbery after a woman makes a frantic 911 call.
One of the bad guys had gone in, turned the face, and then made her go out there with her husband where they bound her as well.
The homeowners have been assaulted, tied up, gagged, and
sacked the house.
Once gone, the woman managed to break free and, still blindfolded, desperately called for help.
They found the tape off of her eyes and continued searching for the other victim. They found him on the floor unresponsive. He had been bound with a tablecloth, but they had used duct tape to tape around his head. Responding officers cut his bind, started CPR and rescue breathing until the paramedics can come in.
It's not clear at initial outset whether the victim...
Paramedics came in and checked him, put leads on him, oxygen sensor on him, and declared him deceased. I recognized him. I had met him before. It was Mr. Kumra. Mr. Kumra was definitely a very successful businessman. I didn't find anybody that disliked him. I had met him several times at different things in town. He used to go to one that was called Last Call, and that was mostly all locals, sort of like the ambassador or the mayor of that group. Always happy, always nice, buying people drinks. Everybody loved him.
Wife is sent to hospital with facial injuries.
And when we talk about that world of criminality, unfortunately, you have individuals that are prepared.
Not only did they lose a family member, it's going to affect, the living victim probably the rest of her life. Super traumatic.
Investigators cordon off the scene and begin a forensic sweep.
Absolute state. Everything's been thrown everywhere. It's going to be a long and meticulous examination of items within that scene.
This property was huge. It was about 7 acres in size. The house itself was about 7,000 square feet. Me and my sergeant, we talked about where should we be looking the most. 2 crime lab people walk with us.
And what needs doing urgently and what can take a little bit longer. So what are your quick hits? What are your fast track actions that are important?
Evidence was going to be our best evidence.
The female homeowner tells officers there were multiple offenders.
There was at least a suspect, maybe one outside who was doing the driving.
Where there's been more than one offender and more than one victim, you'll get mixed DNA profiles. That means individuals. Sometimes you can separate them out. One of the first things you need to work out is how has the offender got in?
With jewelry and over $30,000 in cash.
I couldn't tell at that point if it was, but it was just a theory that we started with. You just passed 30 other houses with no gates. Why are they picking this house?
That makes me think that it's either someone that has got a key to get in, or someone that's been let in, or there's been an insecure door or window quite freely.
There was no broken doors, but there were a couple of unlocked doors. The sliding glass door that where the TV was on, and we figured that Mr. Kumra was watching, that door was unlocked. It kind of struggled with him, taped him up, and left him there. It seemed that they would have had to have had some sort of the people that were living there.
If there's no signs of forced entry, that says to me that the offenders have really planned this out.
Your first point of...
Raveesh's wife tells police the man who assaulted her used his nickname Ravi, suggesting he might have known him.
Yes. So there had to be a reason. Homicides in Montecito. I think that this homicide was probably...
The peaceful community of Montecito has been rocked by the first murder in the neighborhood for decades. During a violent robbery at his side after being beaten and bound.
Everybody in the neighborhood was super concerned. It's a very affluent area. A lot of athletes and people like that live out there. Very quiet, very nice place to live.
Silicon, we're talking about exclusivity. We're talking about the super rich.
In our area, we would see things mostly into cars. In the downtown area where the shops were, we'd get a lot of theft during the day.
When a crime of this magnitude happens, the police force into a bit of a frenzy because the rich and the wealthy are going to want answers.
An ought is asphyxiation after being gagged with duct tape.
The victim had been bound around his head and nasal passage, which has obviously restricted amount of bruising on other areas of his body. He had succumbed to a vicious attack.
The pathologist also finds that this putting him more at risk.
We know the wife of the victim was saying he's ill, he's poorly, despite the fact that to kill, they were very prepared to engage in high levels of violence.
It's Sergeant Erin Lunsford's first time leading a homicide investigation.
It was definitely a little bit overwhelming. Everybody was looking at their video cameras. Unfortunately, anything we did get was super grainy.
There's going to be a lot of pressure.
At the crime scene, CSIs have identified a number of potential leads.
Contained a number of latex gloves, about 21 separate gloves, and it appeared that these had maybe been washed. There was a lot of soap on.
We found more gloves in some of the cabinets in the kitchen. They had used a white duct tape with tape around his head. We collected all the pieces of tape because we figured there's going to be some DNA on those. Roll.
I'm just going to swab the end of the tape here, held by the offender. There's a lot of contamination from the victim, but on the ends of the tape there may well be fingerprint evidence in the sticky side.
20 exhibits from the crime scene are sent off for DNA analysis.
These things were left around and kind of suggest to me that could it be that they watched and observed at the moment where Raveesh was, taking his last breaths, and maybe it's like, now I need to leave. It's that they were leaving behind.
Detectives are convinced the attackers were helped by someone close to the Kumras.
One of them was that somebody who had been to the house had given the information to the suspects to be able to come.
The fact that there's no forced entry of the property means that potentially it might be somebody that the victims know.
The first people we talk to them, see if they have any idea of what happened. From there, then you go to employees or close friends. They hired a lot of people, assistants, they had gardeners or handymen, just trying to paint a picture of the life of the victims and where the bad guys come into their lives.
Raveesh moved to California from northern India in 1970. Mobile phone industry.
He made a ton of money. From there, he took his money and bought a winery and a concert venue down the road, and he did that for a while until he sold that off. And I don't know what he was doing at the time besides being retired.
This is a while seeing him out and about at parties, at social events, spending money. So there may be individuals in the community are familiar with this wealth and familiar.
We need to know, what does he do every day? Who comes over to the house a lot? What are his habits? Who's he talking to?
At the scene,
his cell phone was actually found out in the middle of the street, all smashed up. So the laptop was definitely one of the most important.
There's a huge amount of knowledge that can be obtained from a laptop. What people, the police have to go through each one of those contacts to see where they were at the time. Do they have an alibi? Are they a potential suspect?
Let's look at Raveesh's contacts. Forensic scientists examine the multiple latex gloves found at the scene.
Be exhibited separately. Be important to kind of look at whether these gloves have been worn. This glove looks like it. So therefore, you have to look at the best place to swab for DNA. The best place would be around the cuffs and also on the inside of the finger to tease them open. There would be a lot of pressure on the police to investigate this quickly and work quickly. You work slowly and meticulously, and it takes as long as it takes. And sometimes that's quite hard to manage people's expectations.
Analyze each glove. Police looking into Raveesh's lifestyle have a development.
When I started looking into the background Mr. Kumra liked to hire, I was finding some, in my opinion, bad habits. It was determined that Mr. Kumra liked the company of sex workers. It was something that he did a lot of. And it was several
offenders, and the pool of offenders, that net starts to get wider and wider.
Detectives look more closely at women. Meanwhile, forensics has a breakthrough. They've identified 3 suspects: Lucas Anderson and D'Angelo Austin. Garcia's DNA has been found on one of the gloves in the sink of duct tape.
D'Angelo Austin was living up in Oakland, California, an hour north of where we were at, and people that he hangs out with.
We've got Silicon Valley, where Raveesh comes from, where hasn't seen a homicide in 2 decades, and in California. And even though the worlds are completely different, there's some common themes that bring them together and then align them. Money.
Garcia are identified as members of the notorious ENT gang in the ghost town area of Oakland.
You know this gang, you got Stubby, you got MOET, money over everything. This kind of highlights what the group is all about. ENT. He would hold so much status. This is an individual that will be well known. He grew up in an environment where these behaviors of criminality would have desensitized him.
The third suspect, Lucas Anderson, appears to have no connections to the gang. Damning.
So one of the samples we would take at a post-mortem stage would be fingernail scrapings and fingernail cuttings. This is to see any fibres or hairs that have been caught under somebody's fingernails. If someone's been putting up a fight or trying to protect themselves, there may well be DNA back to the offender.
Lucas Anderson's DNA is matched to a sample from Raveesh's fingernails.
Felt good. I felt like I was finally starting to get the evidence. We figured that we had 3 suspects, and we had 3 good suspects. DNA, they all had criminal histories. So I felt, man, we finally got this.
But first, they need to find them.
Never pinpoint where D'Angelo Austin was at. He didn't really have a residence. He was couch surfing, or the money he used in it to stay in hotels and just spending money everywhere.
They're known to the police for a reason. They're criminals. They're not going to...
Lucas Anderson is the exception.
I was able to find that Lucas was already in the county jail in custody.
He was arrested a few days after the attack on the Kumras on unrelated burglary charges.
He came in to our interview room. He was acting, I don't know, nonchalant.
Not going to be charged with a crime tonight. Hey, charged with a crime? Yeah. For what?
Was shown pictures of the victims. He said he didn't know them. He didn't know where Montessorino was. He had never been there in his life.
Our crime scene on our victim. Starting to ring some bells. I don't know what you guys are talking about. I don't.
And if you think I did it, like, whatever. You know, my DNA's there. He goes, I have no idea. I wasn't there. Never been there before. I don't know.
With no alibi and his DNA on Raveesh's remains, Lucas Anderson is charged with first-degree murder. Him a public defender. Immediately, something doesn't add up for Kelly Paul.
Lucas was pretty open when we are. You can imagine with histories that people can be guarded. He's not that person. Doing some kind of a sophisticated gang-level crime that fit his criminal history.
Born on the streets, Lucas Anderson has a mental health condition. Alcohol after being in a serious traffic accident.
When we do a social history workup for a client, we're going to not as just in that crime, but who Lucas is as a person, how he grew up. You're looking at every aspect of it. That includes childhood trauma. That includes mental illness. It includes many things. But for Lucas in particular, we knew there had been a mental health us to start pulling records. The first step for us was to just hit every county hospital because we knew that
As Kelly's team hits the phones, police have a location on D'Angelo Austin.
We determined that Fritz and that he was supposed to be staying with her because he was out on parole at the time. He was calling his sister, and we were able to work with them to get the GPS so that we were able to pinpoint him to a car and where it was going.
Surveillance. Both are brought into custody on suspicion of murder.
Guys like this who have been questioned by the cops a lot, they're just going to denied everything and invoked their rights to an attorney.
Based on the DNA evidence, they're charged with Raveesh's murder. Sergeant Lunsford still needs to work out who provided them with information about the Kumras.
Then it's my job. So we obtained records for cell phones, we obtained records for calls and text messages. Another thing that we collect, the DNA is the big center block, and then everything else is connecting the dots.
The team's strongest for DNA, found on Raveesh's body. But after scouring through medical records, his defense team has made a case-shattering...
The investigator called and said, you've got to see these.
The DA called me and said, hey, the defense attorney for Lucas wants to have an alibi. And I said, well, that's interesting.
In our world, alibis have to be perfect, and it was an absolute...
How did his DNA get there? It was on his person. So how did they come into contact if he wasn't there?
Police investigating the death of Raveesh men after forensically linking them to the crime scene. Lucas Anderson's DNA was found on Raveesh's body, but and have called an urgent meeting.
So we went, me and the DA on this side of the table, and then Kelly on the other side of the table. They hand out a binder, and I start looking through it right away. He had been in the hospital at the same time the crime was being committed.
We learned that Lucas had been hospitalized. Homicide happens until after it happens, and that he's on literally 10 to 15-minute bed checks throughout the whole evening. We're completely stunned. It was kind of a drop mic moment. They made no comment at the end, and they said,
As a crime scene manager, it makes you then question how his DNA actually... Sometimes it's quite hard to timeline when that's been placed there. So just because you find someone's DNA in a crime scene doesn't mean to say that it would have been put there several days earlier or even potentially several weeks earlier.
Lucas insists he can't remember anything from that night.
Lucas struggles. He had significant mental health issues. He also had traumatic brain injury, which affected his ability to be a historian. He had a series of friends that also lived on the streets with him. We had walked the streets during the investigation, and they were very protective because of some of his deficits.
You know, him being an individual that's just thinking about somewhere to sleep or just being able to, was in that situation where I was told that my DNA scientifically was at a crime scene. I'd be feeling scared. I'd be thinking...
Anytime that someone's charged with a homicide, one of two things is possible. If convicted and those allegations are found true, a person, they may have life without the possibility of parole, meaning that they will never get out of prison.
If he is innocent and he's sitting in jail because of me, I need to get him out.
Been in custody for several weeks. An inquiry into how his DNA was at the crime scene is launched.
We knew a person on our hands. It's like, oh, good Lord, now what? Because now we're fighting to get somebody out of custody. And that's with, again, everybody's beliefs around DNA and that it's the gold standard of guilt. He really only had two options. One was lab, or there was transfer.
There's a potential that if I touch a surface that someone else has touched and move it somewhere else, because it's so sensitive, you could have like secondary and tertiary transfer of DNA, and that can become a massive problem.
The crime lab, and they looked at cross-contamination.
All the forensic scientists must have been seriously worried about where the contamination has come from.
Stress point for me until they did their internal investigation and said, no, it wasn't at the lab. And once that happened, then it was like, I've got to figure out how this happened.
Sergeant Lunsford looks at whether Lucas could have had any interaction.
We had no information of how they had tied Lucas as one of the perpetrators. For people that do have significant gang connect over that from juvenile all the way through adulthood, there was none of that for Lucas. If you were some gangsters wanting to commit a crime, you're not.
On Lucas, I struggled finding anything. I found more and more and more on the other suspects.
History of drug trafficking and committing residential burglaries.
These home invasions are the typical MO for a lot of gangs. Because
intelligence has found the gang targets Asian heritage families.
Some criminals target particular people from the South Asian community. We're talking about these stereotypes that they hold loads of gold and jewelry and cash within their household.
Posted a number of music videos bragging about money.
Typical of many inner city gangs, you know, to talk about their lavish lifestyles, the festivity. It glamorizes a particular lifestyle. One is not just about what you hold. It's about power. It's about status. It's about respect.
Experts notice a chilling lyric.
They mentioned duct tape, which really signifies that duct tape is definitely a tool that they utilize whenever they...
Convinced someone who knew the Kumras helped them, the team tracks the men's movements on the night of the murder using phone data.
DNA. I was just trying to make sure that I could show that with the evidence to show that my theory was them on their phone traveling all the way down to our area and then back again.
Cell site data is good, but it can't explain. So although the offender's been in the area, they need further evidence to tie him to the actual crime scene.
We obtained records so I was able to go through the text messages and see who they were calling, what the conversations were about.
Of hours of call and text logs. Inquiries into Raveesh's finances reveal things aren't what they seem.
Style that he lived. It comes to a point where the wealth starts to decline. He doesn't have as much money that he once had. Discovering that investigation team to start thinking about, well, who are the potential suspects? Who did he owe money? Who has he been giving money?
Women he paid for sex, large amounts of money, and lavish gifts.
He actually started families, had relationships with, raised their children, his children and theirs. And we were trying to determine if any of the women that he had hired or had relationships with were women. We had to find and interview and see if there's somebody out there that may have been able to get that extra money.
One name stands out: Katrina Fritz, Austin's sister.
You're looking at who his family is, so that name popped up there. We found out that Mr. Kumra had been having a relationship with Katrina Fritz for probably around 10 years.
Home hundreds of times.
She was seen as the main girl. She would have been around Raveesh in some of his most, intimate, absolutely everything.
She would have access to the residence. She would be able to know which doors are commonly going to be unlocked, what he laid out. It was kind of putting it together to me that she could have been the inside guy. Now I think I have how Mr. Kumra was possibly targeted, how they were linked together, and how they knew to go up to this out of town. It was enough for me to get an arrest warrant, and they were able to find her and take her into custody. Interviewed her for probably 2 hours the first day. She tied some things together, all in regards to her relationship with Mr. Kumra, paying her for sex. He was also just giving her money, what their plans had been,
The beginning of their relationship was at a time when Raveesh was in the midst of his glitz and his glamour. We knew that a car was...
On his laptop, detectives find he signed a letter agreeing to pay her $30,000 towards a down payment.
Financial issues on his end was leading to less financial assistance for Katrina, so they just kind of drifted apart.
Having the same amount that he once had, he may have got to a point where he didn't want to give as much money or give her the gifts or the things that he wants.
Insists she doesn't know anything about the robbery or her brother's movements.
When we started talking about her brother, she just lies, and I knew were lies.
Call data shows in the hours before the murder, they spoke 4 times. During the call, outside the Kumra's home, watching Raveesh. Confronted with the evidence, Katrina clams up.
2 hours.
Katrina Fritz is also charged with murder. But although convinced they finally believe there are more people involved, there is still unaccounted for DNA at the crime scene.
When the crime lab DNA samples that we found, there were several partial DNA strands that they found.
If it's a that to any database, because it could hit against hundreds of names. When you actually can identify who the suspect is, then you can match that suspect against that.
Their case watertight, the team needs to not only identify the other intruders, but solve the mystery of how Lucas's DNA was...
You need to ensure that no other DNA in that scene could be as a result of contamination.
That actually, for the defense team, can be unity to say, well, if there's doubt about that DNA, then there's also potential doubt about the gloves, about the duct tape.
4 hours, I looked to see, well, is there a place where he could have run into Lucas? And I couldn't find any of that.
Lucas, 8-block radius in downtown San Jose. So you kind of, if you are looking for Lucas, you know where to go look for him.
I looked at it from both sides, and I couldn't figure it out. Anderson and his hospital trip to my victim, and in the end, I figured out how it happened.
Police in California investigating the murderer believe they've solved the mystery of how Lucas Anderson's DNA appeared at the crime scene, despite him never being there.
Paramedics.
On the night of the murder, paramedics were called to treat Lucas after he was found blackout drunk. Jose.
2 paramedics transported Lucas to the hospital, and on that scene, they treated Mr. Kumra, determined that he was deceased. So that was the common link between the two. And they said, well, what we would do is we come in, put the leads on him, put a pulse oximeter on his finger. I mean, I can't 100% prove they did not clean the equipment well enough. And that's how I believe it happened, is their pulse oximeter transferred a little bit of DNA to the fingertip of Mr. Kumra out there.
You're talking nothing. You're talking a few cells now that they're able to do a full profile on.
It's quite scary to know that your DNA can be found at a crime scene. The fact that science has been developed so much in modern society.
It really does make you question everything you do at a crime scene.
This man could have been put into prison for the rest and done.
After 5 months on remand, the charges against Lucas are dropped.
It was a huge, wasn't fitting together. Custody is stressful on anybody, but in particular for those that suffer from mental illness, for him. So it was good for us to get him out as soon as possible.
Lucas's story sent shockwaves through the criminal justice.
This case was groundbreaking. It was the first criminal case in the United States of proven on a homicide case. And initially, I'll tell you, there was a lot of resistance, not only within the legal community, but within the scientific community.
Evidence, however good it is, it's also really important to check the provenance of that DNA. How has it got into that scene? And
DNA evidence, when done properly, is solid evidence. But when we say things like, can we trust it? It's not can we trust, it's can we trust juries and people to interpret it properly? I think a lot of us, that now we know better, how do we do better? And so what Lucas's case taught us is you got to check yourself on that bias.
Background, the why and the hows can sometimes become a blur. And unfortunately, there's a lot of individuals that can't defend themselves in society, a lot of individuals to argue.
I think that Lucas has a great deal of resilience to him. He's had child streets, but one of the reasons why he has always given me permission to talk about his case is it broke his heart because on the news, and he was always concerned that his mother had seen that. And so he has always been a proponent of wanting his story, people not to have what happened to him happen, but also that his mother would find out that he wasn't a killer.
After all, the case against the 3 other suspects must be bulletproof. So far, Javier Garcia, D'Angelo Austin have refused to speak to investigators about the fatal robbery. But then, Fritz unexpectedly asks to meet with...
Attorney contacted the district attorney's office and said that she would like to speak with us again, talk about giving a statement. Police station, and we spent the rest of the day, it's probably a good 5-6 hours doing an interview of her, and her just telling us everything.
Because she knew it all. She had access. She created a map, and in that map it showed what rooms were going to be, things that these intruders could have utilized to execute their plan.
She insists she didn't know the robber and eventually agrees to a plea deal.
She gave us the identity of a third guy that was there, Marcellus Drummer. She gave us his phone number, and that phone number was travel on that night to the scene and back.
Drummer is part of the Oakland gangs. He's brought into custody, a bracelet stolen from the Kumras. His DNA is compared to outstanding profiles found at the scene.
That can actually help to corroborate stories.
A partial sample from Raveesh's right hand gets a match. Drummer is also charged with murder. The trials begin.
I always wondered why homicide trials took 3 to 5 years. It's because of all the laws and the buildup and everything. Some of the family was there for the trial. I tried to make sure that they were okay. I can answer a lot of questions and come to some final decision in their mind on how things happened. I felt pretty good about the case that we had. If I'm going to try the rest of their life, I need to be 100% positive. And I was 100% positive.
Austin and Garcia are brought before the courts.
There was no remorse or anything.
So you've got young people that live within these particular environments that unfortunately grow up where they're normal, where violence is normal, where homicide is normal, desensitizes human beings.
As part of her plea deal, Fritz sentenced her brother and his co-defendants.
Where people may be getting sentenced for long periods of time. Sometimes it's every man for themselves.
Since the jury retires to consider their verdicts.
I was very nervous because if you have to go to jury trial, it's a 50-50. Attorney and I are both standing, and I think my palms were sweaty. It was such a relief when they came through with the guilt.
Javier Garcia and Marcellus Drummer are sentenced to life without parole. Fritz is sentenced to 7 imprisonment.
I was happy that who I believe did it actually did do it, and I proved that. I was equally, if not more, happy that I was able to prove that Lucas Anderson did not do it. I'm sure that the family is taken care of.
A home invasion is extremely traumatic. Home is supposed to be a safe space.
They've been victimized, and I think good cops have to remember to help the victims through the process. Act family is a lot, super hard for them.